So we're going to go through a few examples and explain the compound interest formula for you. Um, so first off, I know we talked about this in class, but just to clarify, kind of reiterate and maybe remind um, what's going on here. This is your growth factor, and we're used to finding that growth factor, right? We're used to taking 100% and adding on whatever the growth percentage is and then turning it into a decimal. Like if I had 8% growth, it would be 100% plus 8%, which is 108%. But then as a decimal, we divide that by 100, so that gives us 1.08, right? The only difference here, so that would be this. The only difference here is that we have this n here. We have to consider the number of times per year that the interest compounds because there are different rates at which it compounds. So we're talking 8%, and there are different amounts of compounding. Like you could compound every day, you could compound every month, you could compound every quarter, semi-annually, annually. If we're talking annually, that's just normal, like what we're used to, because that would just means it's once a year. So divided by 1 is just itself, and times 1 is just itself. So that's what we have been dealing with, and that's what you've been seeing. Where we don't have to worry about this because it was just happening once a year. But when it isn't happening just once a year, we have to adjust for that. And that's what the N is about. That's what the N is about. So in this example, if we said 8%, that would be the rate. That would be this. So that would be our 0.08, right? Our 1 plus 0.08, the 8%. But compounding quarterly, that means it happens 4 times a year. Quarter, right? 4 in a whole, if it's a quarter. So it's not going to give you 8% each quarter for the year, because that would be 24% for the year. And it's not going to give you 8% each quarter. The 8% is a yearly percentage. So when they say we're going to compound this quarterly, they're going to break it down into an amount where it'll be 8% total for the whole year. So that would be 2. So, well, how would you do that? You would take the 8% and you would divide it by 4 because it's happening 4 times a year. So that means we'd have to give 2% each time. 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%. Right? And that's what would happen right here. It says the 1, which is the 100, and then add the rate, which is the 8%, and then divide by the number of times it happens each year. So quarterly, we would divide it by 4 because it's splitting up into 4 groups. We're doing 2% each time to get 8% total since it's happening 4 times a year. Right? So there's your growth factor. It's now 1.02 instead of 1.08, right? Because we'd be giving 2% each time. Now the difference is though, instead of just saying, normally up here we would have said, okay, 8% for some amount of years. Let's say 5 years, right? Whatever it is, you would say normally, okay, take whatever we have, P, and then 1.08, and then do it 5 times because it happens for 5 years. If it's happening yearly, then we do it 5 times. But the difference down here is it's happening 4 times a year. And if it's happening 4 times a year, then it's going to happen more than 5 times, right? That's 5 years. Happens 4 times a year, it would be times 4. It's going to happen 20 times. So we go to 1.02 to the 20th. Since it happens 4 times a year, it's still only 5 years, but it's happening 4 times a year. So it's going to happen 20 times. And that's how we make up for this. 1, 2, 3, 4 times a year gives us the 8 for the year. And for 5 years, happens 4 times a year, is going to be 20. So those are the adjustments here. Those are the adjustments. We had been using a simple little idea of basically what we had been doing before was just 1 plus r to the t, right? It was just, whatever it was, like if it was 8%, we'd say 1 plus 0.08 to like 5 years, right? So 1.08 to 5 years, and multiply times, what we're trying to find that of. But these adjustments happen if it's not just happening once a year. If it's happening more than once a year or at a different rate than that, we have to adjust using those ends. So let me give you two examples here. Got two examples here. We've got 10,000 earns 7.5% semi-annually for 10 years. Okay, here's what I think we should do. We're gonna write out the formula, 1 plus r over n to the nt. Okay, and then we're just gonna list these things. What do we have? This is gonna make it easier for you, especially when what you're given is getting kind of mixed up, which we'll talk about next week. But we don't know this. This is what we're looking for. The primary or the original amount was $10,000. The rate was 7.5%. Now the rate has to be a decimal. So 7.5% as a decimal is 0.075. So I always put R as a decimal. And then N says semi-annually, that means twice a year. So that's going to be 2. And T is 10 years. Okay. We can just go through and put that then. So 10,000. It grows at 7.5%. So 1 is the 100%, 0.075. It's happening twice a year, so we have to split it into 2. And then it happens for 10 years, but it happens twice a year, so I multiply that by 2. Okay, so you could rewrite this if you wanted, but you really don't have to. You can go straight to the calculator, dump it in the Desmos calculator, and it's going to give you what you need. Now, I just realized that I didn't give it permission to see my whole screen, so I'll just add that in at the end. If you need to know how to put that in the Desmos calculator, go to the end. But we'll move on. I'll put the final answer, and then we'll move on to the next equation. So it is $20,881.52 for that one. And one more, and then I'll show you how to use the calculator too. $300. So again, we're going to have the same kind of things. R, N, and T. We have $300 to start with. The rate is 12%, but we want it as a decimal, so 0.12. Compounding quarterly, that means N is 4. It happens 4 times a year and for 15 years. So we can plug those guys in. 300 times 1 plus 0.12 over 4 to the 15 times 4. So 100% plus 12%, but the 12% split into 4 since it's happening 4 times a year. And then we want it for 15 years, but it happens 4 times a year. So we multiply that by 4. We toss that in a calculator, and we get this. So I guess I'll stop it, and I'll start the new one. Okay, so I would go to Desmos, and you're going to plug this guy in, whatever you have. We had the original 300. And we open parentheses to say that we're multiplying. So it's 1 plus 0.12 over 4. So we say 1 plus 0.12. And then, whoops, that is not in the parentheses. 1 plus 0.12. To put this over something, we hit the backslash button. It's the one with the question mark, backslash, puts you like that. So divided by 4. And then to get out of that, you have to hit the over button. So you hit the over arrow, and it'll take you out of that. Now we want to get up into the exponent, so you can hit Shift 6. That's the little caret, the little up arrow. And then what do we want there? 15 times 4. So 15 times 4. Now that, oops, I'm going to stay up there, times 4. Okay, it's not letting me stay up there. So if you want to stay up there, you're going to have to put it in parentheses, it looks like. Times 4. So put that in parentheses. That little times is, I got that with Shift 8. That's the asterisk. That'll give you the little time symbol. So yeah, if it's taking you out of the exponent, when you do that, just throw these guys in parentheses, and it'll say that is my exponent. So there you go. There's your answer, 1,767.48. And there it is, 1,600 or 767 and 48 cents. And there it is. That's all you got to do. We've got a little formula. I hope it makes sense what the formula is doing. It's basically what we were doing, except we're just adjusting if it's happening more than once a year with that guy. That's the only difference between what we were doing.